So let's turn to Lesson 34, which asks the question, what is the importance of civic engagement to American constitutional democracy? So, why should Americans participate in the civic life of their country?
Well, there's a lot in our lives that we cannot control, and that includes a lot of major constitutional structures. But the idea of having a community that invites contributions from citizens, not about the entire structure, but about the types of obligations and rights that everybody has, and the types of powers that the government will have, is an important part of being a free individual.
How do voluntary associations contribute to civic engagement?
Voluntary associations are part of the American fabric of social and political life. For example, a labor union, a business association like the American Medical Association, other types of work and professional organizations like the United Auto Workers. This is part of what we consider to be a regular association for professional advancement, but also for negotiation and benefits. Then, of course, we have other types of voluntary associations on both sides of the abortion debate, on both sides of the death penalty, on handguns and handgun control. These are also types of voluntary associations. So when it comes to politics, voting is one type of participation, but these associations not only provide personal and community benefits, but they also influence the political system as well.
How can Americans participate in local and state governments, and what are the advantages of participating at local and state levels?
Well, if you think about the things that affect your life from morning till night, is it the local government, the state government, or the federal government that is really controlling or encouraging certain types of behaviors? So, for example, local laws include health, parks and recreation, restaurant inspections, property taxes, schools, and other types of very important obligations of a citizen day to day. If you want to change the health laws, or, for example, smoking in restaurants, that's something that's only regulated at the state level in certain conditions. For the most part, it's regulated at the local level. The same would go if you have alcohol available for sale in your community, what time of day, and whether or not it's available on Sundays. These are the types of everyday life questions that often go right back to local government.
How can people participate in local government?
Well, the first step to participation is not voting, it's education. For example, ask yourself, do you know who your city council member is? Do you know who represents you to your city or to your community? How many members of that council are there? What is their party majority? What is the mayor's job? Who's in the mayor's cabinet? What are the local judges doing to influence your life? Who's on the local school board? Do you care about any of these questions? And if you do, and you probably do, you would first need to know who is representing and what the issues are. One problem with voting is that if we vote without having any understanding of the issues or any understanding of the choices we will have, that decision will become much more burdensome and complex. So education comes first to participation.
You've mentioned voting a couple of times. Let me ask you a kind of a two-part question. What do you think needs to be done to encourage voter turnout? And, at the same time, why has voter turnout generally been so poor?
Well, voter turnout has two main elements. It's the perception of the person about whether or not this is a worthwhile activity. But then there are also the laws themselves. So let's go to the voter's point of view. Is this election important? Is it highly competitive? Will I be heard if I participate? This comes down to whether or not individual voters are being requested, in a way invited into the system. Some states in the United States are very competitive. If you think about the attention that goes into a state like Ohio or Florida or Pennsylvania in a presidential election, think about in a primary, the attention given to Iowa and New Hampshire. Those individuals have a perception that they are invited into the process. And if it's a competitive race where there's extra attention and the candidates come, then it becomes more exciting and the voter feels wanted. Another part of the perception question is whether or not your vote really matters. Does the United States, does your state or your county, are they listening to you? Even if you participate, will you be on the winning side? And if you are on the winning side, will you see the outcomes that you are seeking? That is a very personal perception question. That's a little bit harder to change. But on the second part, the laws of the state and the laws of the United States about voting have changed over time, and it can become easier or harder to vote. But truthfully, this is a state-by-state question. States determine the registration requirements of a voter. Some states have a 30-day registration period. So if you are excited about an election right before it happens, you might not be able to vote if you are not properly registered a month before then. Other states have same-day registration. So for example, in Wisconsin and in Minnesota and a few other states, a voter who is excited at any time can walk into a registration place and register and vote all in one day. Another issue is convenience. This is something that can be done. Is it convenient to vote? In my state of Kentucky, polls are open 6 a.m. until 6 p.m., period. It is a 12-hour window, and it is very difficult to get an absentee ballot. In other states, like Texas, there's a 10-day window where you can vote anywhere in your county before an election. You don't even have to go to a specific polling place. So again, early voting, absentee voting, long voting hours, maybe even making voting a national holiday might all do a lot to increase turnout.
So though you've touched on this, let me phrase it this way. Do you think that there are things we should do to make it easier to register and vote? You said some states do. Would it be your opinion that all states should do those things?
Well, it's a tricky question because the United States as a country cannot compel states to adhere to one standard of how to run elections. Elections are run by the secretaries of state or board of elections in the states. So unless Congress passed a law that mandated certain obligations of every state to their citizens, it will continue to be a type of federalism that is sometimes celebrated, that the patchwork of rules includes, as we mentioned before, taxes, even criminal punishment, but also voting.
So I recognize that the federal government can't mandate something, but are there things you think states should adopt to make it easier to register and vote?
Well, this would really be up to the people of the states to demand changes at the state and local level. So this is unfortunately a chicken and the egg question, because people who are not normal participants might see the whole thing as very burdensome. But if they're not participants, they will not be able to put the pressure on the states. On the other hand, other people in the United States find it very easy to vote, and they find enjoyment in this civic activity, and they do not find it burdensome. Those people already vote in high numbers and probably would not see any need to expand the franchise further. So a final point to make about voting is that it's an individual behavior and an individual choice, but truthfully, over time, we can see a lot of demographic patterns. People who are more likely to vote are older. They're more educated, they're wealthier, they have stronger political passions, and they have very high levels of knowledge of what is going on. So therefore, people who can jump these hurdles really wouldn't see a problem. People who don't know as much may be the ones who need education. And this is really, again, where we start at the beginning. This is where competitiveness comes in. If two candidates and two parties are trying to get bodies into the polls, it is their interest, not just their obligation, but their interest to educate and register and transport voters.
Do you think voting should be mandatory?
Voting is, again, an individual choice, and there are Western countries or democratic countries that have mandatory voting, including Belgium and Australia. And voter turnout, not surprisingly, is over 90% in those countries. However, we have an interesting tension in the United States between citizenship obligations and individual choice. Forcing somebody to participate would really be an unusual type of obligation in the United States. It is perhaps an idea that could come, but it's very unlikely because it conflicts with other values that we share, including individual choice. Part of expression is not expressing. Part of participation is not participating.